Right. Good afternoon, everybody. I wanted to update you on where we are in terms of California's COVID-19 response. As we've been doing on a weekly basis, let me begin the week by just stating up front some of the trend lines that continue to create caution and concern here in the state of California. We're continuing to see hospitalizations rise in the state. We're continuing to see a modest increase in ICUs and number of beds represented by ICU patients throughout the state of California. And we continue to experience an increase in the rate of positivity here in the state of California. I'll go through those very detailed terms in a moment, but just to remind you our approach to addressing this issue going back many, many months. We've made this point on multiple occasions, and that is we're moving back into a modification mode of our original stay-at-home order, but doing so utilizing what commonly referred to as a dimmer switch, not an on and off switch. The point of a dimmer switch was to make the point that as data, trend lines, as the experience of reopening in different parts of the state and people beginning to mix in different parts of the state begin to manifest, different conditions would present themselves. And as a consequence, we wanted to be prepared for those conditions based on the trend lines, based on the data, based on the science, to modify our stay-at-home order subsequently, meaning not on, open economy, or off, shut down, but a dimmer switch, looking at conditions throughout the nation's most populous state as they present themselves, as those trend lines become points of concern before they invariably become headlines. As a consequence of increase in positivity rate, increase in hospitalizations and ICUs, based upon the predicate, this foundation that we laid on utilizing a dimmer switch, today we are announcing additional statewide actions as it relates to our stay-at-home order here in the state of California. We are now effective today, requiring all counties to close their indoor activities, their indoor operations in the following sectors: restaurants, wineries, tasting rooms, movie theaters, family entertainment centers, zoos and museums, card rooms, and the shuttering of all bars. This is in every county in the state of California, not just the counties that were on the monitoring list that we announced on July 1st. So this is a new statewide action effective today. Every county in the state of California impacted by a requirement now to modify indoor operations and to expand opportunities for outdoor operations in these specific categories you see on the screen. We're also announcing effective immediately all the counties on our county monitoring lists. And I'll show you that list, an updated list, in just a moment. All the counties on the updated monitoring list, we are directing they close indoor operations in additional sectors. So the sectors that we're closing statewide, again, restaurants, wineries, movie theaters, family entertainment, zoos, museums, card rooms, and bars, to outdoor activities to the extent possible. Now, with counties on the monitoring list, we have this list: fitness centers, places of worship, offices for non-critical sectors, personal care services, that includes hair salons, barbershops, and indoor malls. So again, these are sectors to close indoor operations in the counties that are on the monitoring list to include these additional sectors that you see on the list we've provided. I'll remind you that monitoring list is one that we hold very closely. We monitor every county in the state of California, but we provide additional technical assistance to the counties that you see on this list. The counties now you see on this list total 30. We are today announcing 4 additional counties have come onto our list: Placer County, Sonoma, Sutter, and Yuba County. These 30 counties in total represent about 80% of the population in the state of California. I made this point very clear a number of many weeks ago when we introduced the monitoring list to all of you that it's a dynamic list. Counties come on. In some cases, counties come off, depending on the criteria that, again, was established on the front end and their ability to mitigate trend lines, to mitigate spread, to mitigate hospitalizations, ICUs, and the like. We anticipate over the next few days a number of other counties look like, based upon the trends, to be entering onto this list. Last Monday, just to put it in perspective, just to contextualize, if you tuned in last Monday, we had 23 counties on this list. Today, again, 30 counties on this list, 4 additional counties. This were placed over the weekend, and I anticipate at least 2 counties likely in the next day or two to be included in this list. So in these counties, we have added, I'll toggle back, a requirement that we close indoor operations for these sectors you see on the list. Again, personal care services, indoor malls, worship services, fitness centers, and the like. As it relates to the total number of cases we're experiencing here in the state of California, yesterday, in the latest reporting period, we had 8,358 cases. Again, I'm now tending to disproportionately encourage you to focus on the 7-day trends and average, as these numbers can go up and down. They can mislead, they generate a headline, but don't necessarily tell you what the trend lines are. Those 7-day averages, 14 days, even better, but give you a more contemporary 7-day average. You'll see that 7-day about 8,211, or actually at 8,211. So yesterday, a little above the 7-day average. Last week at this time, again, put it in perspective, again, 23 counties were on the monitor list, now 30. Last week's 7-day average was 7,876. So you see that 7-day average trending upwards. What has trended down since the beginning of our reporting back in early April is the total positivity rate. So I'll remind you again, total number of tests performed and the percentage of people that test positive, the positivity rate. It was originally very high as symptomatic people were going out and getting their tests. Now that we're providing an average of over 107,000 tests on a daily basis, not just the 2,000 tests that we were providing on a daily basis in April, you're seeing a positivity number increase, but the positivity rate has now settled in around 7.4%. In fact, specifically, over a 14-day period, 7.4%. Over a 7-day period, that number is at 7.7%. So 14-day positivity rate in the state of California, 7.4%. A 7-day average number of tests conducted over 107,000. For what it's worth, yesterday we tested over 137,000 people. Actually, if you round up more appropriately, 138,000 people were tested yesterday. As it relates to the test positivity rate, we constantly want to take a closer look. You'll see where we were just a few weeks ago at 6.1%. Now again at 7.4%. This represents a 21% increase in the test positivity rate over a 2-week period. Accordingly, as we see positivity rates increase, as I say often, you will see the lagging indicator of hospitalizations begin to increase. You're seeing hospitalization numbers increase 28% over a 2-week period. That's a little bit better than the 50% that we presented to you a week or so ago. For a 2-week period last week, we saw a 50% increase. We're seeing modest reduction in the rate of growth in hospitalizations, and that's why the 28% 2-week period is represented in this slide of increase in total number of people hospitalized. I'll remind you, as always, our hospital care system is not just licensed beds, also alternative care sites, but for the purposes of just clarity and constancy, or rather consistency, you'll see this slide, some of you may be very familiar with, which is total number of licensed beds, total number of patients that are hospitalized with COVID-19 here in the state of California. That number, again, 6,485. It represents 8.7% of the total number of individuals that are hospitalized utilizing licensed hospital beds in our healthcare system. So we round up to 9%. Last week, at this time, it was a little above 8%, trended up to about 8.7% in today's reporting period. Hospitalizations go up. Invariably, we'll start to see ICU admissions begin to increase. You'll see in this slide 1,833 individuals now admitted in our ICUs. That represents a 20% increase over a 2-week period. Last week, it was 39%. So again, hospitals, when I reported last week, over a 2-week period, up 50%. ICUs up over a 2-week period, 39%. Today, hospitals over a 2-week period, 28%. And as it relates to ICUs, up 20%. So similar trend in terms of growth rates for hospitalizations as well as number of ICUs. Total capacity in our critical care system for ICUs is at 16%. Total number of ICU patients represented in all of our total ICU and NICU beds. Last week it was at around 15%. So you're seeing it plus or minus 15, 16% represented here. You'll see the total number of ventilators available. It's still north of 10,000, though we were consistently above 11,000 on the ventilators available. So that's something to watch. We continue to draw down purchasing additional ventilators. We've been in constant contact with FEMA, our federal partners, about what the national stockpile on ventilators look like. It's an important thing to do at this stage because, as I remind you consistently, and I'll do it again today, that the numbers we present you are in the aggregate. They're the sum total of all local numbers. None of us live in the aggregate. We live somewhere in the state of California, and there are parts of this state that are in need of additional ventilators. You've made that point in the past around Imperial County. The reason we are moving forward today with additional dimmer in terms of our opening, begin to dim down again, is we're starting to see in some rural parts of the state an increase in ICU use that is generating some concern. Let me be specific. In Placer County and Butte County, ICU capacity is now limited south of 20% capacity in those counties. Now, we have mutual aid capacity. We have a system, again, a system which suggests many parts but one body, a systemic approach to how we share assets and resources. As I said, we've done that in Imperial, bringing ventilators down. But when you start seeing it in multiple counties, you start seeing it in Lake County, in addition to Placer County, in addition to Butte County, when you start to see a little of the supply constraint in terms of ICU beds and additional increase in use and utilization of ventilators, it then draws our attention. The data then bears a consequence, the consequence being the data driving the decision to utilize that dimmer switch. Long way of saying that's fundamentally why today we are moving forward with the modifications that I led with in this presentation. One thing I just think is incredibly important to remind all of you is that this virus is not going away anytime soon. I hope all of us recognize that if we were still connected to some notion that somehow when it gets warm, it's going to go away, or somehow it's going to take summer months or weekends off, this virus has done neither. You've seen parts of the country with very hot, including humid, not just dry weather, where you're seeing an increase in positivity rates, increase in hospitalizations and ICUs. Here in the state of California, as we're seeing triple-digit weather in many parts of our state, we're still seeing an increase in the positivity rate, the community transmission. We're seeing an increase in the spread of the virus. So that's why it's incumbent upon all of us to recognize soberly that COVID-19 is not going away anytime soon until there is a vaccine and or an effective therapy. And again, I focus on effective therapies because on the therapeutic side, this state is really leading the nation and in many respects the world in terms of the advanced trials that are being done here. And of course, as the birthplace of life science and biotech, we're very proud of our innovation in this space and our capacity to develop partnerships with our universities, our research and development, federal labs and the like, as well as the private sector and its ingenuity. A lot is happening in this space. As I mentioned on multiple occasions in the past, we have an advisory group that's focused on therapeutics, and they're consistently offering us some rays of optimism in this space. And I just want to share that because I know that we look to the vaccines and we see that the vaccines are unlikely at scale to be procured, administered, distributed in a way that does justice not only to the state but our nation and the world in an immediate term. But there are some interesting opportunities to advance therapeutics that can mitigate the morbidity, not just the mortality of this disease. And I'm going to be focusing on socializing that a little bit more by inviting our members of our advisory committee to make a public presentation to share with you some of that insight very, very shortly, which I've been looking forward to doing. We want to make sure the presentation is ready and we're not providing you a false sense of optimism in certain cases. So we're organizing that as we are our testing update, which will be forthcoming. In fact, tomorrow, Dr. Galley will be presenting our new reconstituted testing task force, 2 new co-chairs of the task force, again, just coming from record number of tests conducted. This is the next iteration of testing that includes, by the way, schools, includes strategies for employers, strategies for effectively targeting in a much smarter, more efficient and effective way our testing sites in terms of testing deserts, diverse communities, vulnerable populations, but also looking at issues of costs associated with testing, so it's a more sustainable model, and we could build on the success we've had over the course of the last few months. As always, I want to remind you, limit your mixing with people outside of your household. It's just common sense, but the data suggests not everybody is practicing common sense. If you do mix, it is so important that you take that mixing outside. Again, that's the spirit of today's presentation, looking at moving a lot of these activities that were happening inside, like restaurants, moving those activities outside, the impact of the spread of the virus outside, we believe, is more favorable than mixing with individuals for an extended period of time, cohorts for an extended period of time inside where you don't have the air circulation. And we have seen, based upon contact tracing, based upon examples across not only this state, across the country, but around the world, increase and concentration of an increase in positivity and spread of this virus. As always, continue to press upon you the importance of wearing a mask, wearing a face covering. What more evidence do you need than nations that have taken the bold leadership of acquiring nationwide wearing of masks and face covering? They are much better off than, unfortunately, our country. As a consequence, we encourage you in the state, encourage you to wear a mask, wear a face covering, continue to practice physical distancing when you're coming in contact with strangers or people outside of your household. Continue to practice appropriate hygiene, washing of your hands, and the like. Let me just close by soberly saying that we lost another 23 lives to this pandemic in the last day. 23 human beings who have family members have lost loved ones, being torn apart. It's a reminder of the deadliness of this disease. We had 72 individuals on Saturday that lost their lives. And so I just remind you that not only are people getting COVID-19, not only are we seeing people transmit this disease, but we're also continuing to see lives lost. You saw some of those numbers go up last week, north of 100 lives lost. Don't be fooled, respectfully. I say this not because I'm hoping for this, quite the contrary, but one has to be honest and forthright and sober about this. 23 may be on the lower end, but I'll remind you, a week or so ago, I was reporting just 6 lives lost, and then a few days later, well in excess of 100 lives lost. And so this continues to be a deadly disease. This continues to be a disease that puts people in our ICUs, in our hospitals, and is currently putting a strain on our hospital system and in our ICUs. Good news is we have over 300 million masks, N95 masks, procedure masks, in our current state stockpile. Hundreds of millions being distributed over the last few months. Hundreds of millions more will be distributed and are being distributed in real time as we built up our PPE. More capacity and resource with plans, protocols, procedures, processes throughout the state of California in different parts of the state, alternative care facilities, health care personnel that we've been able to identify as critical additional healthcare resources to provide levels of expertise where there may be mismatches. That's part of our health core. All of these things, including the cohort of now over 10,000 people that have been trained in our contact tracing core, all are advantageous in terms of meeting things head on and allowing us to navigate through this whitewater at the moment and through a little bit of the headwinds as it relates to a resurgence of sorts in this first wave of the pandemic. And so again, dimmer switch being utilized a little bit more forcefully, continuing to be targeted in those areas on the monitoring list to additional sectors, but now broadened throughout the state of California as we see more and more counties entering the monitoring list and more people now going from one county to the other, and ICU and hospitalization concerns presenting themselves, particularly in rural parts of the state that may mask their current transmissions and total number of positives that have been identified, but should not mask the availability of appropriate levels of hospital resources, which again have precipitated in the decision that we are announcing and advancing today.